This is quite an amazing array of folks on this stage, and I can't wait to speak to each and every one of you for this celebration of what would have been Brando's 100th year on Earth. So with full understanding of how wildly different each of your answers is going to be, I would love for each of you to start, and we can start with Ed, by sharing your impression of Marlon when you first met him. Set the scene for us and share one memory.
I first met Marlon back in, I think it was 90, oh wait, and I actually met him on Missouri Breaks. I went and visited, nobody invited me, I just showed up. On a movie called Missouri Breaks up in Billings, Montana. Harry Dean Stanton was on the movie, he was a good friend, Fred Forrest, Randy Quaid, Jack Nicholson, also a good friend, but I had never met Marlon, so I just kind of hung out there and was hoping to catch a glimpse of him. One day I did, and he waved at me, and I just had to contain myself and try to breathe, because it is Marlon Brando. And there was a cow there, and then I turned around, I got a little further over to the side, and there was a cue card taped to the cow. I thought that was pretty good. He always knew his lines, but he felt more comfortable having the safety net. It would be there, and I didn't see him in the tape that I saw. He didn't look at it once, but he had a cue card taped, gaffer taped to a cow. I'm going to start doing that. Maybe I'll be as good as him. It took more than that, as it turns out. But he was very friendly, very engaging, and I got to know him better a few years later. I'll tell you that story later.
Yeah, we will come back to that story. Miko, what is your first memory of your father?
Hanging out at the house, watching sports with him, traveling, going to movie sets with him. Just a lot of traveling, just hanging out, barbecues at the house, dinners, just hanging out at the house, basically.
And Rebecca?
Well, personally, I want to say first, thank you to the trustees, Alva, Mike, and Larry for organizing this day. It's a very important day for all of us, and to the Academy Museum, thank you very much for making such a special day. And to you, too, KJ, thank you for organizing this. You know, there are many memories, of course, and the theme that keeps coming up for me is safety, protection, and family time. And my greatest memories are when we would vacation to several different places, and each time he'd rent a house for all of us to be together, all of us kids. And one of my favorite places was in England at Guildford, and spending time with your mom and Milika and your family. And there, he made sure that we had an agenda. We'd have to do something culturally important, something educational. So we'd go to museums, or we went to Hampton's Court, and then we'd have to see a play or a musical. But every night, we had to be home for dinner, and that was a rule. And at dinner, we would sit around, and Dad was always at the end of the table, and he'd ask us about our day, and he'd be watching us, or he'd play a game. And in one of the games, he would have a straw, and he would shoot balls through the straw. And then he'd be singing a standard or playing the drums on the table, and then he'd shoot another ball and just kind of look up like it came from nowhere. And so it was just fun. It was a lot of fun being around Dad at dinner times. The family time was important.
And I'm sure we're going to get back to some stories about what a jokester he could be and his sense of humor. But Carrie, I would love to hear your first memory of meeting Marlon.
I also met Marlon on Missouri Breaks, but I didn't see you there, Ed.
I was camping out in the Yellowstone River. I didn't have the money for a hotel room.
Always had. I was 13. It was 1975. My stepfather produced the film at Lake Casa. So myself and my brothers, we all went out there with my sister to Montana for the shoot, and the first thing I remember about Marlon really was what an incredible family man he was. He really loved his children, you know. He was very protective of them. He loved kids in general. I think it's because he was a big kid himself, you know. And he was also very observant. Within 2 minutes of meeting him, he could tell everything he needed to know about you from just studying your shoes, or the way you sat, or how you held yourself, even before you said a word. So he's, yeah, extraordinary human being.
And Susan, I know you wrote your biography of Brando, Brando's Smile, and it was published in 2015. Did you have a chance to meet him when he was alive?
No, I never did. I always thought it was probably a good thing because I would have just been completely tongue-tied and overwhelmed. But I was just, in some ways, able to imagine him. And through all of these incredible materials I found in people I spoke to.
And David, you worked with him as his costumer on his last several films, but do you remember the first time you met him?
Yes, I was. I got a call from a costume designer named Kristen Evergood, and she was doing Don Juan DeMarco, and she needed a costumer for Marlon, so I dropped everything, and of course, what an opportunity. And the thing I remember is I went in and met him, and it guys, it was kind of an interview, but not really. I mean, and then I just had the job, and right away he pulled me aside and he goes, "Hey, listen, I need you to help me with something." And his autobiography was getting ready to come out, songs my mother taught me. And he had, part of his deal was that he had to do one interview to promote the book, and he didn't want to do an interview. He had come up with a plan to get around this, and he had come up with a character, this British socialite talk show host. And he was going to be the talk show host, so he needed me and my help, and his hair and makeup, Vera Mitchell's help. And so we came up with this thing, and he then could control how he, you know, what the interview was, what the questions were. He had me come up with like an evening gown, fake breasts, high heels. He was, oh yes, it was a woman. Oh yeah, he was into a split screen, and this was his way to get around it. And I guess that fell through, and the interview ended up going to Larry King. But that was my first memory of him, was already kind of how funny he was, and I just knew I was in for a great ride.
Well, this note about him being so resistant to an interview or to press, I think in your biography, Susan, you mentioned that he was bemused by fame and kind of had a particular disdain for celebrity and the idea of celebrity. And I think his ideas about celebrity were actually way ahead of their time. So for a lot of this conversation, I'd really like to focus on a little bit of his home life, who the man was, when he was outside of the public eye. So Susan, you wrote in your biography, you wrote this biography in 2015, it was published in 2015, and during your research, you kind of uncovered what some may consider a few surprising aspects of Brando's character, but those who knew him maybe not so surprising. Could you share one aspect of his character that you discovered in your research that you found the most surprising?
I mean, I'd have to say, in thinking of just all the materials, that his book collection was just the most astonishing thing. I mean, he and the thing about it, I mean, even in the days when academics had books, I mean, it was over 4,000, a collection of over 4,000, and the amazing thing is the range of subjects. I mean, it was almost as if there was nothing that he wasn't interested in, and he had books on things like coconut wood, and he had a book about every kind of animal it seemed he had ever met. I mean, he had a pet raccoon in New York, so he had multiple books on raccoons, books on pigs. I mean, any kind of animal, and he also. He had books on. He had a book about knots, and the other thing that was amazing, many books on science. He was fascinated by science. He was fascinated by religions. He had a Bible for every religion you can name. What also astonished me was the marginalia. I mean, he was someone who carried on conversations in his books, in the margins of his books. He would raise questions, you know, to the authors. How do you know that? Can you prove it? And one of the most common, two of the most common comments in the books were get. I mean, he would put a note by some book that was mentioned by the book he liked, and you know, and invariably that book would show up in the collection. And also dio, which meant dialogue, and he was drawing on all this reading for his dialogue in his films. And that's another thing I hope we get a chance to talk about, the revisions he made in a lot of his scripts, which is just phenomenal. So.
And Carrie, when we had our call where we were discussing what we would want to cover in this conversation, you also mentioned his love of books and his library.
As Susan said, there was a book everywhere in the house, there's many of them. I think he went from one subject to another, even you know, one book to another, sometimes reading 5 books at the same time, you know? And yeah, so many varied topics. I mean, interested in like insects. I mean, he could tell you, you know, that spider's silk is 5 times stronger than steel, you know, if it was made of the same length, the same width. Things like that. It was like a walking encyclopedia, a mine of knowledge.
Yeah, it's funny because, you know, this is before the internet, so we'd be sitting at dinner and he'd say, does anyone know what the white part of the egg is called? And today we say egg whites, or we say yolk, right? And we'd say, no, Dad, we don't know what it is. And he'd say, it's the albumin. Like we're supposed to know it's called the albumin. And another thing he'd say, what do you call a 1-hump camel or a 2-hump camel? And we didn't know. Of course, he knew. And oh God, dromedary is a 1-hump, and Bactrian is a 2-hump. And then another thing would be, did you know that giraffes and humans have the same number of vertebrae? Okay.
Truly a walking encyclopedia. And I also think that we see his fascination with knowledge and learning coming out in really creative ways, because he also he fancied himself an inventor. And you mentioned that when you would meet with him, he would sometimes talk about some of these inventions that he was dreaming of.
He had a patent attorney on retainer at all times, I think. He invented many things. He was going to feed the world with spirulina or algae or something. He had grand plans like that, incredibly grand plans. He had a wonderful thing that he invented to make a tuning of a conga or a bongo easier. You could tune it, or I guess a conga drum. He had that tuning device. He had a patent on that. And all manner of things. He was always coming up with some new invention of some sort. He loved tech talk and stuff like that. I got a call from him through Helena. You all remember Helena Kelly Nortes. She lived right next to Jack and next to Marlon. One day she said, I just made her this table. I made a nice table for her. And he was very impressed with that I could make a table. So he said, get Begley up here. And I started going up there, and it was very interesting. I got to see him so many times because I realized there were 2 things that were very key to me getting invited there. One was he hated sycophants. He hated people who just, oh, what a wonderful idea, Marlon. People that challenge him, he really liked that a lot. And also, he did not want to talk about acting. I figured that out the first visit. More screenwriting or directing or claymation or puppetry or train seals, anything involving show business. But he did want to talk about, you know, like drywall and plumbing and solar panels and wind turbines and straw bale houses. So one day I got a call from him, and again, no show business. I knew that, and I knew not to always say yes, but I got a phone call that was great. At the bagel, it's bran flakes. Give me a shout. I need to speak to you about a project I want to do with you. He wants to do a project with me. And we have distribution. we have all the financing in place, get up here. So I'd ride my bike up there to try and impress him, you know, and it sometimes worked, but this time I just drove the car up and I knew the drill. And if I'd forgotten it, there was big 12-inch high lettering that would remind me. It said, "Stay in your car and honk the horn." So I finally had a horn to honk when I'm in my car to get up there. I wanted to get the part before he gave it to Sean Penn. So I got out of the car because I knew who I was, because there was two beautiful dogs that came loping over towards me. These were dogs big enough to compete in dressage, okay? But they knew me, and they right away, I just made myself supplicant to them, and they kind of licked me, and I walked past the pool to get to see Marlon, to go inside and sit in the TV room. Careful not to do too much roughhousing with the dogs, lest I fall in the pool. And at this point, it was less pool and more algae. It was kind of an algae pit. So I go in and sit down, and he kind of dances coming out to greet me. And he sits down, and he said, "Wait a minute, where's your bike helmet?" I said, "I rode my car up here to get here quickly." "Get me Pat Morrison on the phone right now. Begley bogus on bike riding. I'm gonna ruin you. Then you'll have to do this movie. You'll have to do this project with me." So I sat there and I just waited for him to speak. He said, "Do you know how many volts an electric eel puts out?" "No, I have no idea. A couple hundred volts or something." "Yeah, it's quite high, the voltage. But do you know what a plecostomus is?" "Yeah, it's a suckerfish. Your friend had an aquarium. It sucks the algae up. You have a lot of yeah." He says, "I've got a lot of suckerfish in there. They're starting to breed now, so there's one born every minute." So what do you, with the electric eels, I need you to go down the coast with Joe Brutzman and pick me up some eels. We're gonna put electric eels in every home in America. And I finally realized the project was not a movie project. The financing was not that. The role for me was to help him promote this thing. I said, "How are you gonna," he wanted to run every house in America on electric eels. So I didn't think that was gonna work, and so he was, "Why is everything no with you? You're always so negative." And the next thing he had was pretty good. He was gonna make he loved my wind turbine, that I had a wind turbine too. So he said, "I'm gonna increase the power of it 100%. And he had this giant funnel that he was gonna put in the wind turbine, but it became like Stonehenge in Spinal Tap, you know, the measurement. I said, "Do you know how big my wind turbine is? The funnel is gonna be like 100 feet high, made out of what?" And so I didn't do that, as it turned out, which is a good thing. It would have torn the wind turbine down. It would have increased the speed to like 100 knots or something. But he had many great inventions he did do with Dr. Craven, that one with the deep ocean water cooling. This was real and it worked, and I think it's powering a resort that Dick Bailey has right now in Bora Bora. Dr. Craven and Marlon came up with this thing of taking deep ocean water and running it up to a hotel to cool the resort guests, the employees, and the food, because a kilowatt hour is so expensive there. And that's working to this day. It's an incredible way to save energy, and it works in the tropics and elsewhere. Deep ocean water cooling, Marlon Brando invented that.
It's just amazing that he was thinking about this, and with so much in his life, in his creative life, and in his in his pursuits on and off the screen, he was innovating, and he was so ahead of his time. Because what year was this when this happened?
This was 98 when
98.
he told me that idea.
Well, I can go a little further
Yeah.
back with the wind turbine that you're talking about. And when I was a young teenager, he had a windmill, and he also had a desalination device to convert salt water into drinking water. And this was, way in the early 80s. And he was thinking about sustainability early on in his life. And to this day, Techiroa Society, and on the island of Techiroa, we're carrying out my father's mission, and that is to continue sustainability and do conservation programs and preservation programs, and also educational programs. And so we're here to just continue his mission.
Yeah, and I mean, it is really remarkable just how ahead of his time he was with this, and also with social justice issues. I mean, this is something that I think came from his family. His family had a deep interest in this, and he carried on this through the roles that he was deciding to take, and through activism and certain actions at the Academy Awards that he took when he refused to accept his Best Actor statue. Susan, would you like to speak a little bit about some of the social justice issues that he was engaged with from early in his life?
Happy to. And I think one thing that's really not known about him is that his interest in sort of his social activism, his idealism was really deeply rooted and early rooted. I mean, his mother and also his grandmother were actively promoting Indian rights in the 20s, and his family was very interested in Black civil rights, and these were things that he learned as a young kid, these sorts of values and ideals. And when he got to New York, as a very young actor, he was in a play by Ben Hecht called A Flag is Born, and he was, I think, pretty much from the beginning, he really believed, that film, theater should have an idealistic content, and that actors and directors and people in show business have so much power to shape people's views, and so he really was dedicated to making film meaningful. And this was really from the very beginning of his success. I mean, as a young actor in Streetcar in 1946, and I think this extended throughout his career. But in the early 50s, when he was working on Viva Zapata, he was focused on indigenous Indians in Mexico and reading extensively about them. And so, the idea that his turning down of the Academy Award, for The Godfather, that it was somehow a kind of fly-by-night moment. And, it was, these were interests and ideals that were building from early, in his life and early in his career.
And Rebecca and Miko, this question is for both or either of you. We're outside of the sort of trivia that he would engage in at the dinner table. Was he bringing some of these progressive ideas to his home life and sort of sharing that with his children? Did you feel like that he was carrying that on through you?
Yeah, I remember several times he would say the island, Techeroa, which is, let me just back up, it's an atoll, and it's comprised of 12 islets. And when he was making the film Mutiny on the Bounty, he fell in love with this island and was able to buy it in 1966. And the owner made him promise that if he buys it and she sells it to him, that he is to keep it in its pristine nature, and that he would leave it open for the community and for the Tahitian people to learn about their heritage. And he has kept that promise today. Of the 12 islets, only one has developments on it. And he's always said, in his progressive way, that he thought Techeroa, because it's comprised of 12 islets, and in the middle is a lagoon, and he just thought that it's a live laboratory, and he really wanted people and scientists from all over the world to come and study and see what we're doing on the island, and that is happening today.
Miko, did you feel that any of sort of his statements that he was making in public life, did you feel that at home as well?
Yeah, he had a big, I remember going to Tahiti with him the first time. My brother and I and him were sitting on the island all by ourselves looking at the island going, what are we doing here? There's no power, no electricity. This is back in decades ago. And he had a vision of making it into, first of all, he wanted to build a school there. That was his big. And then big on oceanography, big on solar, big on we had made a contraption that made seawater out of fresh water, and we used that for a while. And then he was into ham radios, and that's the way we communicated from the island back to the mainland. And then he got into solar power and windmills, and everything was just his vision of what he wanted to do at the time on the island. And my brother and I and him are just sitting there going, wow, really? There's nothing here now. And I mean, there was nothing, but he had vision, and he slowly built it, and now it is what his vision was.
Sort of taking a U-turn from some of these more serious topics that he was engaged in his life. Rebecca, you mentioned the spitballs. He would sort of shoot across the dining room table. And I know that each of us on this stage either learned about or were witness to some of his antics throughout just spending time with him. And so I would love to start with Carrie and just have each of you share a moment of Marlon mischief that you remember.
He was very playful. And I shared a few car rides with him, and one of his favorite things that he liked to do was when we pulled up at a traffic light, he would observe people talking on the sidewalk, and he would start mimicking their voices. But he'd give them, he was very specific about their backstory and their characteristics, and so detailed and hilarious, obviously. And that was what he would do. I mean, it was an amazing mimic. I think even as a kid, right? Yeah, an amazing mimic, yeah.
David, I know you have some funny stories to share as well.
Right, well, on our last film together, he had, which was the score, he had acquired a remote control fart machine.
Oh my.
And
I'm so glad you're telling me.
and it wasn't quite as sophisticated as you would have today, but you would hit it and you would not know what the fart was going to be, whether a little or a full blown. And so he would bring this out, and I remember we were doing a scene, and it was on like an L-shaped couch, and it was Marlon was at one end, Robert De Niro was at the other end, and in the middle was Ed Norton. So they rehearsed the scene, and then Ed Norton and Robert De Niro get up and leave, and stand-ins come in. But Marlon would like to sit and he would just sit there and be lit and talk to the crew, talk to the electricians, everybody. He was always very interested in the crews, what was going on with them. So anyway, this was a rather stressful day, this particular day, and I think it was because it was like the one scene where we had those three actors. So it was getting a little tense, and he called me over and he said, "Where's the fart machine?" And I said, "Well, I think it's in your trailer." He goes, "Well, go get it." And I could feel the tension that they were trying to get the scene. And I said, Marlon, I don't know if this is a good time to play a practical joke. And he was sitting there, and I got in very close, and he goes, "It's always a good time for a practical joke." So I went and got the fart machine. He had me take it. He took the control. He had me take it and put it underneath the pillow behind where Robert De Niro will be. And they come back from the two other actors come back. They're doing the scene, and Marlon he waited till right before De Niro's line, and he hit it. And the first one was a really little, just kind of but it kind of went by. Nobody really noticed. You could tell De Niro noticed. And then he did another one, and it was quite a long one. And I remember De Niro just kind of, and then he did it a third time, and then Frank Oz lost it. He pulled his headphones off, and it became quite a scene. But it was, I'll never forget it. I just thought, how did I come to be in this situation? What I thought was a delightful situation.
Facilitating a fart machine.
Yes. Oh, he would also take it. We would go to dinner afterwards. Alvara and I and him would always go to dinner afterwards. and he would take it to the restaurants. We would be in an elevator and do it, and he would do it right as the door was opening and people were getting out. So I'm sure everybody
Oh
thought
my.
that Marlon was just like, you know, letting him rip right there. But he never let things get too serious. He never took himself too serious, and he wouldn't let anyone else take themselves too serious.
Someone on this stage will know if this is true, confirm or deny. I've heard it, I was not there. But on Godfather, there's a scene, I'm not sure if it's in the movie, they're carrying Don Corleone down the stairs, either sick or deceased, I don't remember that important detail. But there was some discussion about get big guys because of the weight of carrying him downstairs. And so he had heard that. He had them find 4, not 1, not 2, but 4 Chapman crane weights. They're very heavy, they're lead. And he had them put that in their little thing that they're carrying, the stretcher that they're carrying down on. And people started to lose their grip and fall, and he's laughing his ass. Does anybody know if this is a true story?
It sounds true.
I mean, he was a prankster. He had a great sense of humor. Even though when we think about Marlon on screen, we think about, you know, this image that we see here, this brooding individual, and he played soldiers or captains or military men so often in his career, and he's kind of defined as this, you know, masculine sort of brooding figure. So to hear that he had this amazing sense of humor is just like, it's such a great angle to have on him, and that each of you in some way got to experience that, and Susan reads about so many accounts of it is really great. I think we're running out of time here, actually, because I do want these folks to get to watch this movie. But I wanted to leave us all, or leave the audience with each of you sharing your favorite role that he's played on screen, your favorite film role of Marlon's, and why. And David, we can start with you.
It's hard to say, because you think of a great role and you think, well, a great role is when you see somebody and you think nobody else could possibly have done that role. And so many of Marlon's roles, probably all of them are that way. But I find that the one that we're about to see is a pretty incredible debut onto the screen. It kind of burns up the screen, and I think we'll never see the likes of this kind of a performance again. And I remember I would try and talk to him, and I remember yes, Ed, he would not want to talk about films, but I did ask him a question once, and I said, who did you prefer as far as your Blanche goes? Was it Jessica Tandy or Vivian Leigh? And I barely got the words out, and he goes, oh, Vivian Leigh. And he talked about her, and I'll never forget, because he talked about her dress, that she was as delicate, it was like butterflies on her chiffon dress, and she was so delicate, and I know that he really, really admired her performance in this film.
And this was the first of 4 consecutive Oscar nominations for Brando, with Streetcar. It was the first of 4. That's remarkable. Susan.
Yeah, well, I can only talk about the film that in which I was sort of struck by the thunderbolt. I mean, I was a 12-year-old kid in upstate New York watching television, and he came on in Mutiny on the Bounty, and there was something about that figure, the role that he played there. I mean, the sort of restoration comedy, the wit, the sort of power of the figure, and you know, the rebel. It really just caught me, you know, my attention, and you know, it is interesting to me how many you know, women, and especially intellectual women, you know, had similar experiences of just seeing Brando on film for the first time. You know, Joyce Carol Oates, the famous novelist, you know, another upstate New York kid, she saw him in a film, and then, you know, traveled all around, you know, riding on buses to see him in other films. But you could just name a whole bunch of people who had similar kinds of experiences, but for me it was Mutiny on the Bounty,
which we are screening in this series later. So this is just the opening night. We have 10 other films in this series throughout the months of April and May, so we will be screening Mutiny on the Bounty. Carrie, what about you?
I can't pick one particular role. I think they're all so brilliant and so varied and specific, nuanced. I really love Marlon more for the fact that he changed acting forever. You know, there's a clear delineation in the acting profession. There's BB before Brando, and then there's no, really, there's AB, which is after Brando, and you know, everything that he did, we can actually put a date on it, December 3rd, 1947, which is when the play of this movie debuted on Broadway, and people who saw it said they were seeing something entirely new. And what that was Marlon was the first actor to really inhabit the role. You know, he wasn't really acting, he was being. And people had never seen that before. And so, you know, when he yells in the film as Stanley Kowalski at the end of the movie, this primordial scream of Stella that you know, was heard around the world, there are two things going on there, I think. One is obviously Stanley Kowalski begging his wife to forgive him, but the other one, I like to think anyway, is Marlon yelling to Stella Adler, his mentor, who he worked so hard with, and you know, in this victorious, albeit you know, cathartic scream of "We did it! All the hard work paid off. I'm here." Interesting. Yeah.
That's so beautiful. Rebecca.
I have two. On the waterfront, because he plays, he's a fighter, he's a big guy, and yet he's so vulnerable at the same time. And then my kids love that. That's their favorite. And the second one is Don Juan DeMarco, because I really see, it's hard to, I don't think he's acting. He seems to be playing himself. He's very much himself in that movie.
And we're screening on the waterfront 2 weeks from today. Miko?
I enjoy all of them. I remember one night we were all sitting around the dinner table with some friends, and someone happened to ask him, "Marlon, what's your favorite movie you made? Or what do you think the best acting you've ever did?" And he goes, "Burn." Burn. He said, "Burn." I go, "Okay, we're not gonna." But my favorite role for him, being a loving father.
Oh.
Ed?
Terry and On the Waterfront, just magnificent, as is the film you're about to see, but that's just like Rebecca. I just love that movie and he's such a fighter, was such a fighter for so many worthy causes. I just love him in that.
Thank you all so much for being here tonight. This has been such an honor and a thrill.